Thank you very much. Excellencies and ambassadors, it's a real pleasure to be here. And thank you very much to UNDP for the invitation to join you. As I said, I am indeed based in the UAE, in the Prime Minister's office, but I'm talking today to you on my individual capacity. Oops. So we didn't coordinate in any way, but the ambassador, in his opening, already basically said everything that I wanted to tell you. So thank you for making my job. Some of the key messages that I wanted to convey, and his definition of what is and what is not innovation, I think is exactly spot on. The main message I wanted to convey to you is that public sector innovation is changing. And therefore, we also need to think about differently about how we build the capabilities and what are the capabilities that are needed in the public sector. Just a few years back, when you talked about innovation in the public sector, you would also emphasize speed. You say we need to be faster, and of course, we need to move faster. This is not to deny that, right? So this is a quote we often use, right? If the speed on the outside is greater than the speed on the inside, then end is there. So yes, in the bureaucracies often there is this image that Natia was mentioning at the beginning, right? We are slow, we are not working fast enough, the pace of development is much greater on the outside. And this is really important. However, I think in the last few years, the focus has changed a little bit. So if you think about a 1 second definition of innovation, which is an idea that is being implemented and adds value, the emphasis on speed is really how fast we move from idea to implementation, right? We need to be agile. And again, this is really, really, really important. However, in the last few years, and what you're seeing around the world, is that discussion is changing actually about what value this is added. And is innovation actually doing improving things or not? Are we doing things right, or are we doing the right things? And this is really where the debate is changing now. This means we need a different way to think about innovation. We need to have different questions that we ask ourselves. So innovation has not only a speed, innovation has a direction. Innovation is not neutral. Innovation can cause harm as well as causing good things. And we need to have a debate about what we mean about what this does and does not to society. So these are not really new questions, but I think these are questions that governments these days around the world are asking themselves a lot. What is the public value that is coming out of innovation? And when we talk about innovation, are we really talking about iteration, doing things slightly better? Or do we really mean this word that everybody likes to use, but it's very, very difficult to do, which is transformation, right? As we are doing today. So let's talk about values and effects. A big question that all countries are asking themselves is which industry should we invest in? How do we make ourselves future-proof? Are we actually adding the right type of value, right? So for example, lots of governments around the world are investing in electric vehicles. Now when you start looking at this, in principle this is a great thing. When you start looking at the supply chain of electric vehicles, you start asking, there are important questions about values to be asked. Are you locking yourself up into a particular type of supply chain? Are we actually causing more environmental damage because what sits in electric cars is actually rare minerals that are, a very hotly contested topic at the moment. And so what you see that even the poster child of electric vehicles, Norway, is having second thoughts. Why? Because actually by encouraging people to bring on electric vehicles, which is great, right? You're actually causing people to get addicted to cars. And eventually you want people to move away from cars. And so the Norwegian government is having this debate at the moment. Again, I hope you can see that there is not simple black or white, right? But it is the type of debate you started to have and you say, oh, well, in principle, this is a fantastic thing, right? And you start thinking about what value this adds to society, you start asking different type of questions. And so it's not a surprise that even the IMF, for a long time, was not really in favor of industrial policies is saying, well, it's time for countries to really discuss having a national dialogue about which industries they want to operate. Another question when it comes to value that countries are asking themselves a lot is which innovation model should we follow? Many countries. You hear me? Shall I scream? Sorry. Many countries have followed the Silicon Valley model. And of course, there is an awful lot to be learned about what is happening in Silicon Valley, but there's also lots of questions that are starting to be asked about this. For example, one of the things that Silicon Valley has promoted, the big companies, is move fast and break things. Well, guess what? If you work in the public sector, you cannot afford to break things. So at the moment, you probably have seen it, right? So recently, the robodebt issue in Australia, for example. The Australian government was very keen to adopt artificial intelligence, basically automated the process of welfare social benefit allocation. This way, it has discriminated against 500,000 people, and it has to pay 1.8 billion Australian dollars in compensation. This is causing a big debate, as you can imagine, in Australia, but across the world. A similar case happened in the Netherlands, about the automation of public services, about how we deploy artificial intelligence. What do we do with it? Is it positive? Is it negative? It's something we can shape. But how do we have a debate as a society in how we shape these technologies is really the question of the day. Technology for what, right? So again, innovation is not only about technologies, as was said perfectly at the beginning. So let's think about it, right? So lots of governments have been investing in smart cities. Again, smart cities is really important in many different ways, but what often has translated into is, for example, a proliferation of surveillance tools. And the promise was that this would make cities safer. Now this, increasingly, there is evidence this is not necessarily the case. Let alone the debate that this is causing in societies about the limits of surveillance. So take a different model, same technology. The city of Barcelona said, we don't want smart cities, we want smart citizens. We want citizens to own the data and take decisions based on the data that they actually have. They produced a smart citizen toolkit, which means that people can do their own environmental monitoring, for example, on their terrace. And one of my favorite projects is called Radar. Radar is about elderly people that suffer from dementia or live alone, right? An increasingly big issue in many countries across the world. Radar mobilizes, so if you know that there is one person like this, or the family notifies all the shops in the community, the barber, the baker, the newsstand, and says, you know what, my dad or my mom may be coming along, I want to let you know that they actually might be confused, lost, etc. Please call this number and they will let me know. It's a very different notion of surveillance. Same technology, if you want to call it this way, but very different results for society. There is not one central room where people are looking into things. There is a whole community that is building social capital and talking about where are the people in need in our community. These are the type of choices that the public sector, these days, when it comes to innovation, increasingly needs to make. Oops, I stole my thunder, I'll let you know anyway. So, the OECD has recently, a couple of years back, made basically an award for which is the country that has the most innovative innovation policy. Now, which country do you think it is? It's not Singapore, it's not Sweden, it's not Switzerland, the countries that are the top of innovation index, it's Paraguay. Paraguay, 6 million people. And why they awarded this? Because Paraguay took the trouble to have a national dialogue about the type of innovation that they want. They went to school, they asked kids, what type of innovation do you want to see in this country? They went to rural area, they asked farmers, what do you want to see happening? It's a small country, but in every region they discovered that actually people wanted a slightly different flavor of innovation. And that's fine, right? But they invested all of this into actually invest the whole ecosystem, right? That's the discussion that probably the community establishing today is going to have. What kind of innovation do you want to see in that country? Same thing, Finland, Taiwan, other countries, right? So you see that when you start asking a question not only about speed, but the question about value, you start asking different type of questions, and you need to have a different type of societal debate around what innovation means. Now, the second big word comes from innovation, right? Do you want iteration or transformation? Now, I like this image. This is what the Australian government often uses to make the difference between iteration and transformation. Transformation is one of these words that is very difficult for governments, right? So iteration is a faster caterpillar. Transformation is a butterfly. If you want transformation, you're talking about radically changing the logic underpinning the systems in your economy or in the public sector. If you want iteration, you have a faster caterpillar. So let's give an example. Let's say that you are a government and say we will digitize our hospital and reduce waiting lists by 30%. I think if I ask you, would you like to have that? I think most people will say yes. This is fantastic. Yes, again, we need this. But imagine if you say, we will get rid of hospitals. We will actually make doctors and nurses part of a community, and we will focus not solely on a cure, but on prevention. This is a completely different way of thinking health system. Incidentally, this is happening in the Netherlands. It's called the Würzburg model. It's now in 30 countries around the world. Right? Now here you have a faster caterpillar. It works within the existing paradigm with the existing logic. Here you have a butterfly. But this, of course, requires a very different understanding of innovation and who do you involve. You need a whole ecosystem to do this. Let me give you an example. The UK government has made this pilot project where basically, as you know, data centers are a big issue in terms of heat and energy that they consume. And so they basically put a data center next to a swimming pool to warm it up. And so this is very clever. It's very nice. I brought to Dubai this startup, and their vision is to transform data centers into forests. How do they do it? They encode the DNA of governments, documents and archives, photos, into the DNA of trees. So your government archive becomes literally a forest. The technology is very early days, right? They basically bioengineer DNA so that it corresponds, so you can encrypt photos, documents, you name it, into the DNA of trees. And so instead of hiring data engineers, you hire botanists. They did the first proof of concept, right, in the Netherlands. The point about this is that you can see that it would involve a completely rethink of a whole industry. And the stakeholders to go with it. How do we achieve it? How do we build the capabilities to imagine and do this in the public sector? You might be familiar with this project, right? The South African government, in the middle of COVID, created 1 million jobs. And it did so by rethinking the social employment programs that typically have a very bad reputation, right? They basically said, well, we're not going to do a faster caterpillar, we want to do a butterfly. So they redesigned completely the process so that, for example, they wouldn't just allocate people to do public works, which is typically what happens. They would actually allocate them to do community work. They forced people who applied for the initial subsidies to actually commit to creating at least 1,000 jobs. Which means that all the different players in the country were forced to collaborate, because typically the project would be for 20, 50, 100 people. And all of this created scaling effects and rethought the way actually of job creation. So, if you buy this theory, right, if you want to have butterflies, you need to involve a much bigger part of society. As the ambassador said at the beginning, the distinction between public and private that is often put in contraposition doesn't work anymore. You need to think how you bring these different sectors together. And if you're sitting in government, that's very difficult, because you need to understand the incentive of a startup. You need to understand the incentive of someone who works in a small municipality. You need to understand the incentive of a CEO. Understanding incentives if of all this big ecosystem becomes a big new skill. Deloitte has published this report on new skills in the public sector, and it points out to the neighbor, Georgia, and actually how they were able to pull off their law on investment funds. By actually doing an incentive analysis of a different players' ecosystem. And then saying, we actually need to understand what is in it for a venture capitalist to come here. What is in it for a regulator to do this? What is in it as a judge to do this? And all this process has actually led to the promulgation of the law. And what you see, oops. Thank you. Governments using increasingly new tools to understand the innovation ecosystem. This is, for example, Serbia, analyzing what are the interaction between the different players in their own innovation ecosystem. And this, if it works, an example from Seoul, where they looked at who is talking to whom in their innovation ecosystem, to get a sense of who is actually are the players and are they actually not talking the right people. So again, if you want a butterfly, you actually need to talk about much bigger scale of transformation. This is an example from Slovenia. Slovenia actually wants to turn the whole economy circular. Not one sector, the whole economy. And what they have been doing is they've been mapping the supply chains of the different industries and starting engaging all the stakeholders across the supply chain to say how do we turn circular. Imagine the level of coordination needed, the time, the effort to understand the different incentives of people. How do you do this? People who are used to work individually, and all of a sudden comes the government and says you need to work together. It doesn't work typically very well, does it? So how do you actually do it? What are the way to organize yourself to do it? Different set of skills. And of course, I was very encouraged to see this. So it means that some of these capabilities, of course, are here in Armenia, right? I imagine that pulling off something like this means bringing public sector, private sector, academia, all sorts of different parts of society to work together. So, once again, if you think about innovation having not only speed but a direction, if you think about wanting butterflies, not caterpillars, you need to ask very different questions. Which brings me to my final point. This means that the public sector needs to develop different type of capabilities. Now, again, traditionally, innovation efforts in the public sector has been to create, let's say, innovation managers. Yes? And this is also about, again, speed, appropriating different tools, working within your own department. Increasingly, what we need is mission managers. Ambassador mentioned the Horizon program, right? It's all oriented around missions. And this is a different set of capabilities. Because if you want butterflies, you need people who are able to talk one day to a startup, one day to a completely different type of sectors. If you want to be able to hold together not only the quick wins, but also the big picture. You need to be able to build bridges across different sectors. And that's a key core capability. Now, this sounds very daunting, and I don't know about you, when I see GII index and saying things like 80 for Armenia, that may sound discouraging, right? So let me offer you a glimmer of hope based on the experience of other countries. So what is often said when you need to build public sector capabilities is that you need to import best practices. There's a very famous, I worked in Indonesia for a while, and Indonesia, one of the most famous Indonesian academic papers is called Don't Go to Denmark. Because they were sick and tired of all the consultants telling them you need to go like Denmark. Okay? So, what is a different approach? You work with what you have. And particularly if you're in a situation of crisis or post-crisis, even more so. So this is a famous book from Yuan Yuanang, an economist, that caused a big debate in the development sector. Some of you might have seen it. And basically the question was, how did China lift so many people out of poverty? And she basically said we did exactly the opposite of what international organizations were telling them. Which was you need to have best practices, you need to have perfect institutions, and only once you have perfect institution, you actually get there. What she basically said is, you look at your capabilities and your assets, even if they're very low. That's what China did. And then start to create some areas of growth. And what happens is that once you start developing sectors, they ask the public sector, the private sector asks the public sector to become better, more efficient. And this is a process of co-evolution, right? Back and forth. My little understanding of the IT industry here in Armenia, that maybe it's one of these cases, right? Where the capabilities, the industries go better, and then it asks the government, and then back and forth, until it became a really thriving industry, right? So, what does it look like when it comes to the public sector? How do you work with what you have today, as opposed to saying, oh, no, to do endless training, endless best practices, benchmarking, and all these other things? How do you do this? Well, this is an example, for example, from the US. This is the Ministry of Energy. And they basically said, if we really want to have clean energy projects, we need to have missions. We cannot just do little projects, we need to really transform. We need to have people with the capabilities of mission managers, engaging them, different parts of a society, working together with different parts of a supply chain, doing these big transformative projects. And they created these clean energy corps, which is basically looking at their own stuff, and then started saying, how do we develop these capabilities over time? And when I look at the program you have here for the diaspora, I think, well, this be an entry point for actually saying, can we look for this new type of capabilities, the mission managers, and actually try to work with it, right? Something that you have here already, that you can build on and maybe iterate on. I'll tell you about one program that I liked a lot in the UAE, which is asking exactly the same question. Incidentally, I saw that you were talking about road traffic. We started as a road traffic project. The question was, can you actually empower frontline staff in government, the people who are closer to the problem, to become mission managers? How do you do it? This process, it's called government accelerators, and nothing to do with the accelerators that you see in private sector. This process inverts the hierarchy of government for 90 days. What happens? The minister comes and says, this is the problem. Frontline staff, not the minister, say, this is the target we commit to within 90 days. The minister says, okay, in a public statement, if you achieve this, this will become policy. And then you have freedom to bring together different parts of society that you need to solve this particular problem. We'll see each other in 90 days. This is a way to create acceleration, empower people, particularly imagine someone from a front line who never even had a chance to meet a minister, let alone to be in charge of a project, that can go to a CEO of a company and says, I need you to solve this problem today, right? And has this type of capabilities. And this type of process happens on a regular basis, right? Pick topics and try to build the muscle. Again, you work with what you have, with the capabilities that you have right now, to actually try to enhance it and liberate them. Now, since we have lots of senior people here, I just wanted to tell you that one of the biggest, the three most important words that you can say to your staff, if you want to work really to enhance capability, to your innovators, I see you. There is plenty of research that shows that no matter what, yes, all public sector employees want a better salary, but actually the ones that are really motivated, are innovative, the hackers, the bureaucracy, entrepreneurs, really, the first thing that motivates them is recognition. And so to think about what is your way to tell to your colleagues, I see you. Yeah? Whether you are in a municipality, whether you're in a ministry, wherever you are, I've noticed you. It's really one of the big, interesting challenges. So let me give you one of my favorite examples. This is a program of the French government, which is called the State Startup. If you work in the French government, and you are working in any level of the government, and you have solved something, so you don't have an idea, you actually proven that this thing works. You can apply to this program. They take you, no question asked, out of your ministry or out of your municipality for a period of up to 9 months. They pair you up with people from different parts of the ecosystem, and basically you can create your own startup. Now the difference between your startup and this is that it is a state startup. The state actually owns it. So the capital, the intellectual capital of this process, as well as the capabilities developed, eventually can remain in the state. Eventually this can be spun off, but it's a process of actually saying again, you work with what you have. Your innovators right here, right now, not the people who talk ideas, but actually who solve the problem, let's actually empower them to do more of it. My final word is about, in all of this, is the role of imagination. Now this is not the word that in public sector we like a lot, at least I don't know where you work. But I actually think that if you want to think about innovation in this particular moment in time, one of the things that we really need to talk about is imagination, which goes back to the Nelson Mandela quote, right? So I'll give you an example. Attaché, please don't take this as anything about Japan, because I actually think it's a very interesting question, right? So many governments across the world are investing in the metaverse. So basically, how do you recreate government in the 3D world? Now, one thing that I find always interesting is if you have to recreate government and you have a space like a virtual world where it can look like anything that you want, why would you recreate your offices? Why would you have stairs in the virtual world? Why would you want to actually go in and do a document like this? So I talked to the team behind it, and they were really, really cool, right? They said, look, we really wanted to go crazy, but it was so difficult to actually get approval to do things completely different, right? And I think this is an interesting question. Imagine you have a blank slate. You could do anything that you want with government there, if you really wanted to. How do you actually push the imagination this way? Another example, and again, don't take this in any way as an offense. I'm a nerd. And so one of the things that I do is I collect national innovation strategy from government around the world. Now, do you see a pattern here? Now, the future is invariably blue. And there is, at some point, some kind of humanoid, right? Or an artificial arm looking at you like this. Why does the future need to look this way? Couldn't the future be pink? Couldn't the future be all sorts of different things that have nothing to do with this? Why are we limiting our imagination to one particular trajectory? So when people tell you it's inevitable, all these things need to happen, why? Why can't we actually say, as public sector, we actually, part of our role is to imagine different things, to imagine butterflies, right? And so, why shouldn't the future look like this? Or something completely different? Here we have a Ministry of Possibilities, right? And to signal this type of things. The UK government has just hired the first head of uncertainty. Yes, that was exactly the reaction of the public, by the way. Now maybe a world of risk, a world of continuous unexpected things requires different things. Important thing is that these are not just playing with the names, there's actually substance behind it, right? So I want to leave you with this quote that I like a lot from the head of transformation in the Australian government. We design institutions we have today, we can do it again. Thank you very much.